The Fourth Level of Learning, Paper 6, The Sirian War and the Golden Age, by Penre, written on Thursday, October 17, 2013, edited by Professor Bob Stannard. Archangel Michael and the Sirian War. Lucifer had multiple problems. He was now directing a guerrilla war in the Canis Major asterism, where the Sirius star system was located, in fruitless attempts to free his minions from the abyss around the dark star in the KHAA. Although he was thrown out of heaven, he still had limited access to the KHAA. What he couldn't access anymore were the higher dimensions, where Satania and the Orion court were located. The key to the Dragon's Gate was no longer in his possession, and he needed it to be able to defeat his mother and his father. This, however, had to be a future problem. First, he needed his generals and admirals back, who were all of them now imprisoned beneath the grid that was set up by Khan Enlil and Prince Ninurta. For some time, Lucifer had studied another evolving race who lived on a planet orbiting Sirius A. He knew that his mother had spent a lot of time in Sirius in the past creating a few planet-bound species there, so that they could meet each other later and share cultural traits. This species was still purely androgynous, which suited Lucifer well. That was what he was looking for. The Nibiruans had already made a pact with Lucifer's stepfather, so it would be too dangerous to involve them in Lucifer's plan, at least at this time. Lucifer had his ways of manipulating beings, so this young race should be a piece of cake. They were not yet a conquering species, but they were much into technology. After the usual time to slowly introduce himself to a race who had never seen an alien before, he managed to gather the main city councils throughout this forest and mountain world into a great meeting where he and the team of the AKH, who followed Lucifer to the meeting, promised to come up with some great news for everybody on the planet. Lucifer offered to help this species evolve much faster so that they eventually could be living a more harmonious, safer, and happier life. He also promised to give them technology in order to be able to do so. The only thing Lucifer and his men wanted in return was from this evolving race was to help him free the Dark Star prisoners, who he said had been put there illegally by a vicious, faraway star race. Moreover, he told them that this vicious race had now moved on to another galaxy and left Lucifer's friends captured around their neighbor star. There was no need to be afraid because it was highly unlikely that this vicious species would come back. This was a lie, but he reasoned that the end justified the means. After some dispute, which took longer than one meeting, the queens decided to make this agreement with the odd beings from the skies. After all, their leader, calling himself the Morning Star, seemed very honest and friendly. Lucifer smiled to himself. This had gone far beyond his anticipations, and soon enough, he was showing off his technology in order to impress the queens. The council was indeed impressed and found most of what was shown to them very helpful. Lucifer was holding back, however, because he had no intention of giving these beings any of his advanced technology. With his great knowledge in the sciences, Lucifer had also learned how to genetically manipulate and alter an existing race with technology. Although his mother had taught him a lot about the sciences, she never taught him to engineer, alter, and manipulate a species with the help of technology. Lucifer is famous on Earth, to the level of glorification when it comes to being a genetic engineer. Little do we humans understand that being a genetic engineer is not a glorious thing, it's just an alteration of something that is sacred, such as seeding a star race and letting them evolve on their own merit. What then will become of them is entirely up to the evolving race. That's what a free will universe is. The Mother Goddess wants diversion in the sense that she embraces differences. This is how she learns more about herself. However, she does not support a break in the law of free will and non-interference. Lucifer was well aware of this and the extra trouble he may be subjected to if he broke these laws, so he tried to proceed as gently as possible. The only break of the laws was to contact the race when it was not evolved enough to travel in space or to have a connection with star beings. Other than that, the Sirian queens agreed to his suggestions, which were a manipulative way of bypassing some serious paragraphs in these universal laws. Essentially, he wanted to take revenge and was going to do so by genetically manipulating this evolving race. But not without their consent, of course. Using more of his smooth talk and hypnotic voice, he also managed to convince the Sirius A planet-bound race how important it is to have two genders. Projecting films and pictures on screens, he showed them what happens with a race of only females versus a race with both females and males. Nowhere in his lectures did he mention that this was a part of the natural evolution of species. Instead, he taught them that their particular race had a mutated gene that prevented them from evolving in that direction. All they needed was a little help along the way. Nor did he tell them about his agenda, which was to create a strong, male warrior race for his army. Eventually, he managed to convince the council. When Lucifer had his agreement, he started his genetic engineering project, where he added his own genes and mixed them with the native Sirian DNA. This was also the time when Lucifer teamed up with Isis, who is Ninurta's daughter and was born in the Sirius system when the mother goddess was seeding Sirius. We will be discussing Isis in more detail later. Hence, this species of hybrids, whom Lucifer and Isis created, are their offspring. Creating two genders so that the species could reproduce sexually was a much faster process than to let them reproduce through parthenogenesis, and besides, Lucifer wanted males. The Sirians proved to be a relatively easy species to manipulate genetically, and after a few generations of hybrids, Lucifer had a much more intelligent and obedient race. Therefore, it didn't take long until Lucifer was ready to begin the task of releasing his minions at Sirius C. As we know, a planetary race such as the Sirians and Homo sapiens can't use their physical bodies to travel in space. But that was never Lucifer's intention. What he wanted was a race evolved enough so that the females could use their fire to break through the grid and reach the trapped bird tribe on the other side. Once this was done, he would, unbeknownst to the Sirian females, let his minions possess the females who performed the ritual. This way, he was hoping that he could free his lost legion. What would then happen to the souls who originally possessed the female Sirian bodies? A qualified presumption would be that the freed prisoners would expel them. Another possible option would be to exchange the Sirian soul with that of the Namo by using tractor and retractor beams. One way or the other, the original Sirian soul needed to be evacuated from their body. It was an evil plan, but also the only plan Lucifer saw that could work. Lucifer and groups of ignorant Sirian females ritualistically made initial attempts to punch holes in the grid, but the energy bounced off as if stones were hitting a metallic shield. Lucifer became nervous because there was always a chance that his plan would be discovered, and he could be in trouble without warning. He knew that his former fellow Orions were not stupid. Soon, they would notice that someone was trying to break through the grid. When it didn't work, Lucifer stopped the experiments immediately, in order to play it safe. He realized that these females were not evolved enough to be able to do the job. He needed to work more on his genetic engineering. In the meantime, the Orions did notice that something was going on with the grid and that someone had been attempting to get in rather than to get out. And they understood that it was an attack. It was obvious who was behind the attack, but they couldn't locate the source of it because the attacks had stopped. Khan Enlil was notified. The Queen was notified. In the Orion court, there was no doubt who planned the attack, but the question was, whom had they used to almost succeed in freeing the prisoners? To their knowledge, there were not that many females available to Lucifer to accomplish what had been done. Also, there was no disloyal star race in the neighborhood that was evolved enough to help Lucifer. Khan Enlil, Archangel Michael first in command, decided to go and find out for himself. The prisoners needed to stay where they were at any cost. Under the circumstances, it would even be dangerous to move them. With some help from the outside, they could quite easily escape. Hence, Khan-Enlil, the king of Orion, gathered the loyal Makh warriors who were available to him at the moment, left the angelic dimensions, and traveled to Sirius, only 8.7 light years from Earth. Earth was where his stepson, Prince Ninurta, was positioned, and Prince Ninurta had been there for many millennia now, but the prince was not going to get involved in the Sirian problem. Khan-Enlil decided. Prince Ninurta needed to be where he was for the moment. What Prince Ninurta was doing on Earth, we shall see later in this paper. For Khan-Enlil and his troops, the trip to Sirius did not take long. They arrived soon after they had left Satania. Confrontation. On the Sirian planet, Lucifer and his Dakh were getting impatient. Lucifer could feel that something was going on. He felt the presence of the Makh troops in the Sirian star system. It wouldn't take long until he was busted, unless he did something quickly. However, an old saying states, when something is done in desperation, it is usually not successful. Lucifer gathered a big team of what he considered the most promising Sirian females he could find among this evolving race and prepared them to strike furiously, and at the same time, if the prisoners could be released in one attempt, Lucifer would get his elite troops back, and his chances of revenge increased 1,000-fold, at least, that's what he estimated. Once they were released, he might be able to take on the Khan's Makh Legion. Khan-Enlil's troops found the Dark Star in the same condition as when he had once left it, after he and his son had set up the grid. The small distortion that had been showing up in the electronic field after the attack had now settled, and everything seemed still and peaceful. The Khan told his troops to wait, however, because he was sure that there was going to be a new attack soon, he could sense it. Sure enough, it didn't take long before a new, increased attack hit the shield. But once again, the strong beams of energy bounced back. This time, however, the Khan and his legion could clearly see where the attack came from, and the Khan couldn't believe it. The attack from hundreds of souls came from Sirius A. How was that possible? The only place it could have come from was the life-bearing planet that orbited the star, containing an evolving race, which had not yet reached the point in their evolution when they even knew that things such as this were possible. The Orion Legion left their position around Sirius C and hurried to Sirius A to see what was going on. The Armada shielded itself and parked close to the planet's atmosphere where the evolving race was dwelling. Soon, Khan-Enlil grasped what had happened, and his presumption about who was behind the attack was confirmed. His son, Prince Lucifer, had attempted to release his own imprisoned armada, but failed twice. Moreover, he had used Sirian females to do the job. Lucifer knew that his father was parked outside the planet and waited for his father's next step. It was obvious that the Khan of Orion had figured everything out by now and was furious. After a silence that seemed to last forever, Khan-Enlil made his voice heard. He told his son to turn himself in order to be put to justice for breaking the law of interference. He also told the evolving race not to interfere with Lucifer's arrest. The answer came fast. Lucifer and his Dakh warrior used their ground weapons and started shooting at Khan-Enlil's ships. The Khan also noticed that for unknown reasons the Sirian race took Lucifer's side in the battle, in spite of the Khan's repeated commands, telling the Sirians that if they didn't stay out of it, they would be treated as enemies of the Orion Empire and be killed together with Lucifer's Dakh armada. They didn't heed the warning. Khan-Enlil quickly reviewed the situation. What apparently had happened was that Lucifer must have tinkered with this species' DNA, and during a long period, Lucifer had warned the Sirian population about the Orion Empire. From the Sirians' point of view, as they could see for themselves, Lucifer was their friend, who had helped them evolve and who had also given them technology. Thanks to Lucifer and his team, the planet had been transformed for the better, where no one now had to suffer. Lucifer had taught them how to use the technology for their own benefit. They knew how to cure diseases, their lifespan had increased considerably, and he had taught them how to enjoy sex between two people. How could he be the bad guy? Khan Enlil and the Queen of Orion had imprisoned Lucifer's people unfairly because the throne of Orion was Lucifer's, and the Queen and the Khan were terrified that he would take the throne from them. Therefore, they had taken precautions and imprisoned Lucifer's people and robbed them of their homes. Eventually, Lucifer's people had become space nomads but still traveled across the universe to help races such as themselves evolve. Now, the Orions had returned with the intention to kill Lucifer and his people once and for all. So were the Sirians ready to pay back some of what they had received over the millennia? This was, they considered, the least they could do. Lucifer's manipulation worked like a clock. How could the Sirians say no? After all, they owed their whole existence to Lucifer. At least, that's what they believed after listening to his slick tongue and pleasant voice. Even today, they still have that belief, as we will discover. Lucifer still needed the Sirians, so he didn't want his father's armada to kill them or to destroy the planet. Hence, the Dakh left the planet, and a furious battle took place in higher dimensions, just outside the atmosphere. The Sirians didn't know what happened out there in space, other than their planet suddenly became subjected to devastating storms, tornadoes, earthquakes, and flooding. It was as if the entire weather system had gone crazy, and many people died from drowning, while others became the victims of some of the other weather phenomena. In another dimension, the confrontation between the Dakh and the Makh armadas was furious. Both sides had access to devastating weapons, and the battle, which lasted for a long time, extended out from the solar system and affected other star systems as well. Both sides asked for reinforcement, and the battle turned into a full-blown war, which is still not settled up to this day. In the terrible battles that followed, stars turned into supernovae and planets were destroyed and bounced out of orbit. Something that apparently happens occasionally in these space wars. Lucifer has always had many balls in the air at the same time, and he has been good at it. This is why he can be so confusing and convincing at the same time. Also, as a star being who lives more or less forever, he is able to think eons ahead. Hence, when the Sirian War broke out, he sent people to warn the wolf and reptilians on Nibiru that things could get ugly, and they needed to flee underground as fast as they could flee. Otherwise, there was a chance that they would be terminated in the war. The Nibiruans were not necessarily on Lucifer's side, although some of them were. They were split because some of them supported Lucifer's rebellion, while others supported Khan Enlil. Lucifer, however, had plans to use the Nibiruans at a later stage, and that was the reason why he warned them. Little did they know that he would be their nemesis, who separated their planet from their star, as we shall see. The Nibiruans, who had received all the advanced technology from Lucifer and his cohorts, now put it to use in an attempt to save their own species, in case the worst came to the worst. They built enormous underground bases, which could house a large portion of the population, at least for an extended period. In addition, they had a large amount of gold, which they could spread out in the atmosphere in order to shield the planet from radiation and to keep the temperature on the surface reasonable. One could say that the Nibiruans had prepared themselves as much as they could prepare, and it turned out to be a good idea. The Sirian catastrophe. The Sirian A planet, under Lucifer's command, was once again in the line of fire, and the Sirians opened fire toward Khan Enlil's troops, unaware that they were attacking their own makers, the Orions. Further out in the Sirius system, the war was also raging between Lucifer and the Khan of Orion. In one of the battles, the fighting parties out in space came a little bit too close to Sirius C, and an extremely powerful subatomic weapon was fired right into Sirius C, which instantly turned nova. Nibiru bounced out of orbit and was violently catapulted out into space, away from its sun. The Nibiruans would never find out that the weapon, intentionally fired toward their sun, was fired by Lucifer. Because the Nibiruans had been prepared, they managed to save nearly 1/3 of the population of approximately 1 billion people. The rest succumbed to the war and died on the surface from the crossfire of bombs or from when the planet was catapulted out of orbit. For Lucifer, everything had, so far, gone according to plan, and now he hurried to aid the Wolfen reptilians, whose planet was flying through space at a high velocity. While he was catching the runaway planet, he smiled to himself because of an idea that he had. He knew that his mother's Orion names were sacred in the sense that she wanted to keep them exclusively within the Empire, and some of them should be used only within her court. To her, it would be sacrilegious to use Orion terms as names and titles by, and for, her enemies. Thus, Lucifer decided to call the runaway planet with its 11 moons, Nibiru, after one of his mother's motherships. In fact, he was going to do just what his mother had done. He was going to use his own version of Nibiru as a hollowed-out battleship. It was a perfect plan. With help from technology, which he'd gained from listening to his mother, he was capable of mining out the planet and extracting its gold. This gold he could use to mix into the atmosphere so that the legion he wanted to put on the ship could live on the surface of the planet, although it didn't have a sun when it traveled through deep space. In fact, he had mined out asteroids and smaller planets and used them as battleships for quite some time, just as Enlil and the Sirians had done when they had conquered space before they were confronted by the Queen of the Stars. Almost every solar system have asteroids floating around, and how would the star races know which asteroids were hollowed out and contained a legion and which were not? Thus, he could attack by surprise or spy on other star races. Lucifer knew he was brilliant. Because of these seemingly primitive hollowed-out spaceships, he had been able to take enemies by surprise more than once. At times, he used them in his guerrilla war against Enlil and the Queen as well. This technique is still used today in our own solar system. Many of the asteroids we see in our telescopes are indeed hollowed out by the AIF and used as spaceships and spying satellites. Some of them are maneuvered remotely. When Nibiru was thrown out of orbit with the entire star race, it became a signal for an armistice, and both Lucifer and Enlil withdrew their troops for a while. Although some of Orion's MAKH troops were left on the fringe of the Sirius triple system as guardians, having orders to report back to the court as soon as something out of the ordinary happened in the region. Many of Lucifer's loyal star races from Canis Major were ordered by their high commander to leave Sirius and make sure they could use Androgynous as a stronghold, with the purpose to conquer the galaxy from there. Lucifer's son, Marduk, was put in charge over that project. Yet another war broke out in the Thebanese, Alpha Draconian, star system, which was already populated by a fairly advanced race, which gave the DAKH some resistance. However, when the DAKH get furious, they are not to play with, and they started using their most devastating weapons toward the Thebanese and raped and tortured when they got the chance. It didn't take long until Thuban's population had to resign. They became slaves and joined Marduk's troops under Lucifer's banner. Thuban was a strategic stronghold for Lucifer because there he could attack both Arcturus and asterisms close by, thus slowly but surely closing in on Orion. Thuban has ever since been Marduk's stronghold, and in order to create strong soldiers out of the Thebanese, he raped their women and created his own hybrid race, which since then has been his own army. Now, let us return to Nibiru. In Level 2, Genesis paper number 3 of August 12th. Mechanics around entrapments of souls in third dimension, Section 4. I wrote a hypothesis about how Nibiru could fit into the research I have done on what I then called the Sirian Alliance, and this can be considered the expanded version of that hypothesis. Lucifer boarded the runaway planet with some of his troops and made sure that they had enough food and equipment to live a long time in deep space. After all, The situation that the Sirians were subjected to isn't that uncommon in the universe. There are lots of drifting planets that don't have a sun to warm them up. Some of these planets do have life, while others don't. Others are used as hollowed-out craft for Lucifer's Dark warriors. A drifting planet, without a sun to warm it up. Even NASA has admitted that such planets are probably commonplace. Lucifer left a crew on Nibiru and taught the surviving population how to be excellent deep space survivors and how to use stargates and Einstein-Rosen bridges, thus, using the KHAA in order to move faster from one point to another. They also became excellent miners, as their planet contained a significant amount of gold that they could extract to save their atmosphere. Lucifer also taught the most intelligent beings on the planet how to eat from the tree of life to prolong their lifespan, just as the gods did. Then they were taught how to become even better warriors. Lucifer had plans to use them in the future. Before he left Nibiru, drifting a couple of light years away from Sirius, he used technology to adjust its orbit just a degree or less so that it would be sucked into another solar system by the gravitation from its giant planets on the fringe of the solar system, which was located about 8.7 light years from Sirius. The plan was that Nibiru then would be catapulted out from this other solar system and back to Sirius again. This would also give Lucifer some time to incorporate Nibiru more carefully into his plans. Basically, Lucifer wanted to use Nibiru as one of his mightiest battleships and, eventually, take Nibiru out of orbit and be able to navigate it as he pleased, without being dependent on natural space gravity. This solar system, toward which Lucifer steered Nibiru, was of course our own solar system. The Matriarchs and the First Golden Age. Let us now go back a few billion years from when Assyrian wars were instigated and return to Sol and our own blue, beautiful planet orbiting its yellow ball of fire in the sky. At that time, Titans lived in the asterism of Lyra. The solar system in Lyra where they dwelled was Vega, Alpha Lyrae, the brightest star in the Lyran asterism and the fifth brightest star in our night sky. Vega, just like Sirius A, is a white star of spectral class A05, at a distance of approximately 25 light-years from Earth. The Titans of Vega were also called the Vulcans, and they were a peaceful race of giant hominids, being very close to Mother Goddess. Just as Mother Goddess blood once ran pure and clear inside us humans, her blood also ran pure and clear through the veins of the Vulcans, and it still does. I described the Vulcans already in Level I as looking quite similar to the Vulcans in Star Trek. When Gene Roddenberry created the science fiction series, he had been present during channeling the Council of Nine, from where he got most of his ideas. This is also something we discussed in detail in Level III. Not only did Roddenberry use the Vulcans as a prototype for his own ETs, but he also used their real name. Dr. Spock is probably the Vulcan that first comes to mind when we discuss this race. However, the main difference between Roddenberry's Vulcans and the real ones from Vega is that the real ones were all androgynous and considered females. Just like humans, the Vulcan skin colors varied from very pale to very dark, with most shades in between. The pointed ears of our mythological creatures, such as elves and gnomes, probably stem from the Vulcans too. The Vulcans had the fire of the goddess. In ancient Roman mythology, the Vulcan is appropriately the god of fire in mythology, symbolizing the volcano fire. Interestingly enough, the Vulcan belongs to the most ancient stage of the Roman religion. The origin of the word is debated because it is ancient, and its etymology is not really known. However, many believe that it stems from the Latin word fulgur, which means lightning and, in turn, is related to flames. This is particularly mind-opening because lightning and fire are highly involved in the creation process and used by creator goddesses when they seed a planet. The Vulcans were indeed creator goddesses, as we will see. Moreover, We learn from etymologist J.R. Capdevel. The Minoan god's identity would be that of a young deity, master of fire and companion of the great goddess. Now we are getting closer and closer to the truth because the Vulcans were the helpers of the great goddess in creating the living library on Earth. The problem is, however, that here on Earth, Vulcan was considered as one deity, when in fact, there were many deities who descended here on Earth to assist the goddess. Also, in the mythology that has survived in mainstream, Vulcan, as described here on Earth, is a male deity, which is incorrect because of the manipulation of records in Babylonian times to fit in with the sitting regime. Vulcan has, apparently because of this, been listed as a male Olympian god. Another interesting association to the Vulcans as helpers of the goddess comes from an entry at the Secrets of the Grimoires website, which is a Yahoo group. Although such a group can hardly be considered academic from this independent writer, it proves my point. Someone else seems to have fully recognized what I have realized, which is that Con-Enlil, here called Supra-Enlil, is distinguishable from Prince Enlil. From comparing the array of sources I have used in Level 4, we can also see the importance in that the following writer also connects Con-Enlil with Arcturus, just as I do. What I find intriguing about this is that we have two tools, the wagon and the plow, directly associated with Supra-Enlil, and these were both things made by ancient smiths, which is a direct association with Tubal Canis Vulcan or Vulcan. That goes further back than any of our usual Greek-Roman mythological material does. Plus it makes me think that Arcturus is a talismanic, it is amongst the Bohemian stars as described in Agrippa and the Liber Hermetis. Star can do a lot more than take away fevers and stop the flow of blood. An interesting point, throughout the history of Babylonian star maps, the circumpolar stars were considered as representing gods of the highest rank. Arcturus was called Supra-Enlil, who determines the destinies of the lands. His wife, Ninlil, ruled the celestial wagon, Ursa Major, and they are associated with the yokes that bind heaven to earth. He was principally associated with farmers and farming. Eretron is the Olympic spirit of Saturn, who was originally the god of agriculture, etc. Enlil was the overall ruler of the gods, a king, and Saturn was identified as the king star in their mythic astrology. Supra-Enlil referred to here can be no one other than Con-Enlil himself, if we read it in context, and Vulcan, or the Vulcans, being the creators, the smiths, or the Arcturian wagon or plow, which would be a much later association to the Vulcan than when they helped seed the living library billions of years ago. Con-Enlil, Supra-Enlil, is also said to be the one who determines the destinies of the lands, which he did, and still does, via the Tablets of Destinies. In a later paper, we are going to discuss these tablets a lot more. Now, we have looked as far back as we can in the human records, at least the ones which are available, to find out who the Vulcans were, so let us go much further back to see what the ancient Orion language may teach us. The Sumerian/Akkadian languages are, to some degree, based on the Orion language. By the way, if we use the star Vega and remove the V and B are interchangeable, which we've discussed in previous levels of learning, but they are also sometimes silent. We have Ega, or Ega, which with time has become the term Ijiji, mentioned in both Sitchin's work and others. In order to give more strength to a word, it is sometimes double repeated, thus Ega above. In Sitchin's translations, Ijiji meant watchers and were those of the Anunnaki who stayed behind, up in orbit around the Earth on the so-called space platform. That, according to my research and sources, is not correct. The two co-conspirators, Ea and Marduk, definitely did their very best to wipe out all the overwhelming evidence of the previous matriarchal golden age, which the two put an end to. They wanted the subsequent generations to think that Lucifer and Marduk had always been God, and there was no other gods before them. Between each other, They play the one and only God in such a confusing manner that it's sometimes hard to tell them apart. To have the reader understand my point regarding who the Vulcans were, let's look at the term Vulcan and break it down. Vulcan is a combination of two words, Vul and Con. Vul stands for vulva, which denotes female, of course, and Con denotes male. Hence, Vulcan means female Con, female king, plain and simple. The word vulva, female outside genitals, goes back, as far as it can be traced, to the Sanskrit word ulva, womb. However, the origin of the word is much older than that, but the definition of the word has stayed fairly intact over the eons. So, the Vulcans were female helpers of the goddess herself and creator goddesses in their own right, also known under the name Igigi, singular and plural being the same. They were identified with fire and could, therefore, be said to be people of warmth, or ladies of fire. They were the very earliest female shamans, also referred to as being of dragon blood, which is the blood of the goddess. This is something we humans possess as well. But after having been genetically tampered with, our blood has been diluted in the process. Thus, it requires a lot more from us to become shamans than it did for the Vulcans, who were pure in blood, spirit, and fire. Those who are said to have dragon breath are breathing warmth, while those who don't have it are cold-blooded and could, therefore, be said to be reptilian in nature, the reptiles being a cold-blooded species. There was a male counterpart to the Vulcans as well, and they were the Khans. They, too, descended to Earth at the same time as Mother Goddess did, and at that time, our planet vibrated on a slightly different frequency than it is now, which allowed larger beings to operate on the planet. This is why, in legend, we hear that there were giants walking on the Earth in the past. The Vulcans and the Khans were, of course, the Titans that we hear so much about in Greek mythology. In Level II, I went into details about the Titans, the Olympians, and the Titanomachy, the War of the Titans. Therefore, I am not going to repeat myself very much in this level, other than necessary to bring forth a new, expanded story of what happened in this remote past. The short version is that the goddess seeded the earth about 4.5 billion years ago, according to today's science, although I am quite certain that the earth is much older than that, and let everything take its time to develop according to the plan. At that time, the goddess had plans to create the living library, a place in the universe where star beings and others could share their knowledge and wisdom and exchange information with each other in a peaceful manner. Her plans were, as we now are aware, much grander than that, but this is how it started. She created a paradise on the fringes of the galaxy. Billions of years later, she came back with the Vulcans, her ladies of fire from the Vega star system. Together, they created the magic that we still can see around us today. The fauna and the flora have changed since then, and the library has been watered down since the patriarchs came, but our planet is still a diamond amongst planets in the universe. In addition, the goddess created the primordial human, the Namlu. They were tall, androgynous, and very friendly. They were also giants in their own right. They were the main reason for the goddess's experiment, and she gave them the fire and the blood of the mother. They were totally her creation. They were of as pure Orion blood as a celestial being could be, and she gave them freedom to explore and do whatever they wanted to do, without interference, no strings attached, no karma to be part of their evolution. There would be no death. This species was immortal, unless it was killed or tortured to death. Their souls were born from the sun, Sol, which at that time got its energy from a trail of stars, including Arcturus, Alpha Taurus, and Safe in Orion. This made their soul and their bodies totally divine. They were representatives of the divine feminine on earth. In their majestic manner, they became the shepherds of the living library, the guardians of that which was sacred. No one could get the advanced information from the living library without going through them first. Sif, Orionis, is a much overlooked star, but it is the sword in Orion's belt. Thus, being the original star in the trail of stars, which were communicating with each other at that time until Lucifer, by hijacking Sirius and other stars in the trail, stopped the flow of energy. Since then, our sun has not taken its energy from Orion anymore, but from Sirius. Finally, the goddess was accompanied by the Khans, the male titans, to bring an even wider perspective to her experiment. Her plan had always been to bring her firstborn son, Lucifer, with her to Earth and give this paradise to him to master and nurture. But things took another direction. Lucifer did not become whom the goddess had hoped for, and because of how things turned out, she had to exclude him from the experiment. Thus, she left the Earth in the hands of the Titans for some time. As time went by, her younger son, Prince Ninurta, had indeed started showing the traits that the goddess had hoped that Lucifer would have developed. The Prince of Orion. Everything Prince Ninurta knew, he had learned from his mother and his stepfather. He had been taught to be a warrior, and he had been taught everything about the mechanics of life and how to become a creator god par excellence. He even knew how to create a soul directly from the universe itself. Thus, he knew how to create life and life forms. As he grew up and had begun to start using the knowledge that had been given to him, he always showed his parents what he had learned and how he used this wisdom. His parents were very pleased because Prince Ninurta was a fast learner, just like his elder brother. But Prince Ninurta used his knowledge the way it was intended. He even exceeded his parents' expectations. Thus, Prince Ninurta's parents were very pleased with their youngest son, who had also shown extraordinary skills and bravery in battle. He also understood the cycle of creation and destruction, the meaning of the universe, and the reason for the law of free will and that of non-interference. He became their real pride, and they wanted to reward him for the skills he had gained. Mother Goddess looked at her son and smiled. She told him that she wanted to give him a solar system that was very special to her, indeed, one of her most precious projects. This solar system, called Sol, or Orion, was located in the outskirts of the galaxy, far away from the womb of the mother, which is the galactic center. This doesn't mean, said the goddess, that it is worth less, quite the contrary. In Orion, she had invested a great part of herself. All this she wanted to give to her son so that he could create by using his own mind. She believed that he was really an extended part of herself, and she trusted him dearly. But remember, said the goddess, that there are those who don't want my experiment in this solar system to succeed, so all your military skills, as well as your creator skills, will come in very handy. You will also be my protector son, in charge of a smaller legion of MAKH warriors, who will be the security guards, to do their best to protect what is sacred ground. Prince Ninurta felt very humble and grateful over the offer, and he bowed before his mother, and he bowed before his father, who had wholeheartedly supported the goddess in her decision. Then he looked into his mother's eyes. In them, he saw the divine depth of the KHAA and swirling swastikas, which represented galaxies and the birth center of stars. Then the goddess' dress was lit up by the stars of the universe, and everything disappeared in front and around Ninurta. All that was left was the infinite void, which was the goddess in her ultimate beingness. This was not the first time that the prince had experienced this, and certainly not the last. But these moments were the most precious and intimate moments anyone could have with the goddess. And it reinforced the very tight connection between the two. Prince Ninurta felt a little weary to take on this huge project and asked for help, at least in the beginning. Both the goddess and Khan Enlil agreed to assist him in the beginning. So Prince Ninurta traveled to this new solar system with a legion of MAKH warriors and a team of Vulcans and Khans. In addition, His mother would always be close in spirit because already a long time ago she had manifested in spirit form inside the beautiful living library, the planet which would be the center of the experiment. Thus, Tiamat became the name of the third planet from the sun, Tiamat being a name for the goddess. Prince Ninurta, the Vulcans, and the Khans, the Titans, started creating together, which resulted in great beauty. They put their hearts and souls into it, and the planet also became the living Gaia, another name directly associated with the goddess. As a stronghold in the solar system, Prince Ninurta chose Saturn with its rings, the major stargate into the solar system, in conjunction with the sun itself, was located at its north pole and needed to be guarded. Hence, Prince Ninurta put a small part of his Makh Legion on Saturn, and a council of 9 of wise teachers, Vulcans, were seated in the rings of Saturn, working across the dimensions. This council had many functions, such as communicating directly with Orion, and decided who would be allowed to enter the solar system, and who would not be allowed. Saturn became a very important outpost for Ninurta and his team. Up until today, Saturn is playing a major role in present events, but for totally different reasons than back in the days of Ninurta. This will all unfold as we move on through the papers. When the lion slept with the lamb. Prince Ninurta is known as the Lord of the Mountains, and that is for good reasons. After the goddess had left and manifested a part of herself as the goddess Gaia, Ninurta created a mountain paradise on Tiamat, which was both the name of Earth, or planet Gaia, in her original state, before the Ave intruded, and a name of Mother Goddess herself. This mountain paradise was in honor of his mother. He called this paradise Ninhursag, which means Lady of the Sacred Mountain. Then, the goddess became known as the Mountain Goddess. This event is well documented in our mythology. Ninhursag means Lady of the Sacred Mountain, from Sumerian Nin Lady and Arsag Sacred Mountain, foothill. She had many names including Ninma, Great Queen, Nintu, Lady of Birth, Mama or Mommy, Mother, Irura probably connected with Homeric Arara, arable land, land generally, Belity Lee, Lady of the Gods, Akkadian. According to legend her name was changed from Ninma to Ninhursag by her son Ninurta in order to commemorate his creation of the mountains. Therefore, from his mountain paradise, Prince Ninurta created a close relationship with the Namlu and the Living Library. This period is known in history as the Golden Age, when the lion slept with the lamb, and no one needed to kill in order to feed their bodies. The frequency of the planet was such that Tiamat's inhabitants could get their energy directly from the sunlight, and nothing else, except water, was necessary in order to keep the celestial bodies alive. There was no starvation, and just like Ninurta was used to from the Orion Empire, no one had to go without. There was an abundance of everything that was necessary for everybody to feel joyful, playful, and filled with love and compassion for self and for one another. This is the first and only paradise on Earth or Golden Age that has happened on our planet since the beginning of time. The paradise of Tiamat did not only include a small mountain area but also spread out all over the planet. Life was simple, but not too simple. There were challenges too, which must be to make things interesting. But wars were unheard of by the Namlu, who had only known peace since their souls were created, just like the Vulcans and the Khans, who were both present on the planet, together with their commander, Prince Ninurta. The Namlu were the children of the Mother Goddess. Civilizations were created during this time, although they were not the same as we know them today. There were no big cities, no cars were driving down endless highways, and no futuristic spaceships were flying around in the sky. However, once our archaeologists start looking under the ice caps of Antarctica and start looking at what is beneath the sand of the Gobi Desert, to name 2 places, they will be utterly surprised because in these areas, great civilizations once prospered and didn't disappear until the Olympians came. Some of these archaeological remnants are from the Namlu era, But there were also other beings who created civilizations in these areas, as mentioned earlier. Although the Namlu became the shepherds and the guardians, they were not genetically engineered and placed in position, from one day to another, to become just that. They evolved naturally and were still in a stage of evolution when the patriarchs came and changed things. The genetic tinkering that was later applied on this species was the work of Lucifer, who was using technology to expedite the results he wanted. Hence, what we so often in exopolitics call genetic engineering has nothing to do with seeding planets with life and letting them evolve naturally. Genetic engineering is used by beings who want to create slaves, while natural evolution is how it is meant to be done, and that's the way creator goddesses are taught by the goddess. Life must start from the beginning and evolve at its own pace, and in its own, sometimes unpredictable, directions. Everything else is done by imposters and cosmic vampires. Some say that there had to be an end to the Golden Age because beings need challenges. When things get too comfortable, people get bored. I do not agree with that theory. If people get bored because there is no war, no violence, and no evil to fight against, it only means that these people have been severely manipulated and don't know what to do without these disturbing ingredients in their lives. These are people who have forgotten how to create something out of nothing. These are beings who need outside stimuli to have a life. No, creation comes from inside of each being. Do we want to create misery and evil, or do we want to create a paradise on earth? Or do we simply want to sit down and wait for others to create whatever comes to their minds, whether it's good or evil, and just go along with it? Isn't that the mentality of a victim? It didn't have to be an end to the Golden Age. It could potentially have continued up to this very day, or the experiment could have been over. If so, it would have turned into something else. There is no end to what creative beings can do. The art of creation flows in both directions. Creation is art and art is creation. The Namlu, the Vulcans, and the Khans, under the command of Prince Ninurta, could do it. So can we, if we have the right mentality and don't let others create our lives. A misconception I have noticed with the Living Library is that the beauty of it is that it is self-sustained because of sex. Without sex, no living library. As the Pleiadians say, it's sex that keeps it going, from the bottom to the top, so to speak. Yes, that's how it looks like in today's library, which has been altered by Lucifer and his Olympians. Before they came and started manipulating an already self-propelling experiment, there was no polarity, man-woman, male-female. The library still worked on sex and was self-propelled, but no partners were needed in order to keep the library running. The IgG from Vega were androgynous, which differs from being parthenogenetic. There are lizards who are parthenogenetic, and there are parthenogenetic insects and plant life as well. They are able to give life from unfertilized eggs. The offspring has no father. Androgyny is a little different, as androgyny refers to the combination of masculine and feminine characteristics. Androgyny was a trait in the primordial human. The Namlu could impregnate themselves, and the offspring also became androgynous. This doesn't mean there wasn't love involved in the Golden Age. Love, as we know it, is very different from the higher concept of love that was so natural then. Love worked across the board, and no one was excluded. We humans, in our limited bodies, can't perceive this higher perception of love, which is much more satisfying than what we feel toward each other today. We didn't need a partner in order to satisfy our need for love. It wasn't even a need. It was so natural to life itself that no one even thought that there might be an option that this type of love wouldn't exist. Misdirected sexual energy. The original plan with the Living Library worked beautifully, and perhaps best of all, there was no jealousy. No one stole another one's wife or husband to have sex with him or her, and there was no competition. Not until the Olympians came and started mixing things up in the library did we eventually get polarization. such as man and woman having sex with each other. Mother Goddess, Prince Ninurta, and their helpers were here to create divine females, ladies of fire. They created womankind here on Earth, while Enki and his Olympians created mankind, which is a totally new species, also significantly degraded from womankind. It's as if womankind had a full circuit of running energy going through their bodies, running through their DNA, while the Olympians took a clipper and cut off all the circuits they thought we didn't need, and we were supposed to become slaves. Just to give everybody hope, quite recently, there was a TV documentary I watched on YouTube about the sleeping pill Ambien and brain damage. There were people who had laid in a coma for years without much hope for recovery. For some reason, a relative of this person decided to give the injured young person an Ambien. An hour later, the person woke up from his coma and started talking. He also said that he could hear everything people had said around him over the years in his state of being brain dead. However, he could now talk like a normal person, and everybody was extremely happy. 4 hours later, however, he slowly fell back into a coma. They then repeated what seemed to be the successful action. They gave him another pill, and he woke up again. A doctor became very interested in this case, and although he didn't believe, at first, that it was the Ambien that did it, he quickly changed his mind. He tried the same treatment on a former advertisement communicator, which is a person who talks in an ad in a very positive, fast, and upbeat voice, with the purpose to make people buy the product. He had a stroke and could only mumble with his tongue hanging out of his mouth. 1 hour after taking Ambien, he was back at the microphone and talked as he did in his heyday. What was going on here? First of all, there is hardly a doctor who thinks that if a neuropathway in the brain is damaged due to an accident or a stroke, it can be recovered. If the brain is dead, it's dead. However, Ambien showed on X-rays and by using cameras on the brain that when you take Ambien, the damaged neuropathways connect again and start working as new. So, the solution, instead of having a lot of people in comas, they could give them Ambien. Now, it's not that simple because no pharmaceutical company would sell the pill for that reason without extended research at the best universities. Allegedly, extended research would cost billions of dollars, and if they eventually approve the pill to be sold for this new reason, the price would be sky high because the big pharma would have to pay back the researchers and the universities. There is legroom here for them to make up costs, but this is one of the ways they make money. In the meantime, thousands of people die because they are not allowed to use Ambien to stay alive and functioning. 4 Ambiens per day, said the doctors who promote this cure, are usually what a patient needs to keep him or her almost normal and sometimes even totally normal. So, what does this mean? First of all, it means that everything we have learned about the brain and brain damage is wrong, and we have to start over. There are no dead neuropathways. This idea doesn't exist in reality. The brain can be cured, regardless of the seriousness of the injury. Second, if we apply this to dormant DNA, we can do the same thing, but without pills. By educating ourselves, as we do now, meditate, and connect with nature and with the heavens above us, we can reactivate the dormant DNA, just as brain tissue and neuropathways can reconnect. I just wanted to give you a real-life story about these things being possible, and reactivation of dormant DNA is happening now, every second of the day, and it is happening in you and me, although we are not always aware of it. Now, we go back to discussing sex. There is nothing wrong with having sex with partners, the intimacy, the sharing of our deepest emotions, and having orgasms together. That can be extremely pleasurable and bonding, if the partner is right. However, this planet is the only planet where sex is experienced like this. If the readers were to dedicate this invention to somebody, it would be Lord Enki. And if I stopped the discussion here, many people would probably feel grateful to him. Nevertheless, Lord Enki didn't do anything for the purpose of our pleasure, unless he could get something big out of it himself, and we have talked about that earlier. While the female, in particular, has a strong orgasm. She connects with the inner sanctions of the Khaa. She is becoming a part of the goddess herself, the goddess that she is. This would be a beautiful thing unless the AIF hijacks these emotions in the ether and stores them for later usage, such as when invading the Orion courts with the feminine fire. This doesn't happen with parthenogenesis or androgyny. Unfortunately, that's where we stand. It would be ridiculous for me to say that from now on people shouldn't have orgasms. That's not what I mean. I only state the fact what can happen. But I have also presented a solution for it. Before you have sex, you decide where you want to steer your energy, you make a clear and strong decision, intend it to happen, and allow no interference. This will protect you. You can also let this energy go to your partner, back to yourself, or to both. It's your choice. And it's a good idea to keep it that way. It's important to understand why things are like they are, or we give all our energy to those who want to harm us and our ancestors. That would be like genocide along the lines of time. I say this also because there are those who claim that Enki and Ninhursag, Mother Goddess, created the living library together, and without Enki, we wouldn't have sexuality the way we have it now. This is extremely misleading, as most readers probably understand by now. Enki and Queen Nin had nothing to do with each other when it came to creating the library, and sexuality the way Enki did it would have worked in a perfect universe, but not when there is already an agenda behind it. So, ladies, and men as well, know about this and set goals for your intimate time with your partner, or if you're by yourself, direct your sexual energy toward where you want it to go. It's very powerful, you know, and you can create great, beautiful, and wonderful things if you're using it correctly. Deep inside us all are ladies of fire and men of fire. It so happens that the female energy is closer to the goddess energy, and therefore, her fire burns higher and more furiously than that of a man. It's because of the combination between soul avatar mind physical body. A female body has another anatomy than a male body, obviously, but it's more than that. Any man knows that the female energy is much different from that of a man. That's why we are drawn to it. Females feel a similar thing with men, but I say similar because it is not the same. The woman often looks for other attributes in a man than a man does in a woman. He looks for her fire, which is warm, loving, safe, and infinite. However, it can also be ferocious if stimulated incorrectly. And females can be far more dangerous warriors than men are. Many men know this, consciously or unconsciously. Of course, don't feel bad if you're a male. You have been female many times before, and you most certainly will be again in the future, if you choose to stay on Earth, but you definitely have experienced both sides. I am just trying to slowly, but surely, get the readers used to how incredibly important our bodies are in the process of becoming free beings. The bodies are our most important assets in the experiment of the goddess. They are able to do things no other bodies in the universe are able to do. So do your absolute best to keep your body in shape, regardless if you're young or old. No exaggerations are needed. However, all that's needed is to have a strong and balanced body, where the energy is flowing freely through the chakras, and stock energy is freed. Eat only food that's growing naturally, and no GMO. For example, do what you can to grow it yourself or buy locally from your farmer or at the farmer's market. Exercise your body, but also here, no exaggeration is needed. Take a brisk walk for 30 minutes or more, with or without a dog, or swim or do some exercise that you feel you can tolerate and that has some type of pleasure attached to it, or you'll probably give up after a while. If you do this, you will get a slender body that is strong and energetic. That's what you want. When you get it, you will soon notice that all the effort you put into it was worthwhile. Your psychic abilities will be greater, and your evolution will take off and go much faster. The next paper will be about how the Golden Age ended, more about the Sirian War and the invasion of Orion, taken to another level.